Broadcasting live from somewhere underneath the ground. Archaeology News. The news you can trust.
Okay, as you may have noticed, I was away for most of the month of June. Part of that is because I was taking a course on human remains in the context of an early medieval cemetery, but more about that in the coming weeks. I also was busy churning out the first draft of my master's dissertation, which I can tell you is no joke. That is a lot of work. But the archaeology news waits for no one, and June was a particularly busy month, so let's dive right into it. Now, this is going to be a news edition of sequels, and hopefully I can do a better job of that than Hollywood has been doing lately. So stay tuned to see if any of your favorite archaeology news stories are involved. First up, the real labyrinth. Now, if you remember way back from our episode on Knossos, that was thought to be the origin of the myth of the Minotaur and his labyrinth, the original labyrinth. Well, other than the David Bowie one. However, also from Crete, a new candidate has been found. This all starts with the new airport that is being built in the town of Castelli, just about 36 kilometers away from the capital of Crete, which is Heraklion. Now, Crete is becoming such a tourism powerhouse that it needed to expand its air capacity, and hence the new airport. And in the process of building this airport, the construction teams came across something that they did not expect. And actually, that's how most archaeology is done. Not as part of a research project, but just rescue archaeology. Something is found as a site is being developed. Now, what did they find? On Papora Hill, which is about 1,600 feet, 500 meters above sea level, the construction team came across a very strange circular building, and this thing was big, about 160 feet or 50 meters in diameter. And it had a very strange internal structure. You see, in the center was a round building within the round building that was about 50 feet in diameter or 15 meters. Now, this was divided into 4 quadrants, and then radiating out from this central building were walls that sort of resembled spokes in a wheel. Now, encompassing all of these were 8 concentric circles of walls, and these walls were really, really thick, 1.4 meters or 4.6 feet on average. So that's some solid construction. So we have this really bizarre, really complex floor plan. You might say maze-like.
How you enjoy my labyrinths.
Yeah, well, that's what people are saying for clickbait, but the real story is probably a little bit more boring than that. Let's examine the archaeological evidence. First, the dating. As such a studied period in world history, Minoan Crete, Minoan Greece, has a very tight serration of pottery, like insanely detailed. So the pottery finds put this structure at about 2000 to 1700 BC, right at the beginning of urbanization and the construction of the palaces on Crete. And that also means it was in use for quite some time, a few hundred years. Now, apart from the pottery, there were a lot of animal bone finds and not much else. So no real signs of habitation.
Come to this planet looking for intelligent life. Oops, we made a mistake.
And given the high, prominent location, we know this could not have been the home of the Minotaur because, well, he lived underground, and we also would have found a lot of human bones because that's what he liked to eat. However, what did the Minoans like to put in high places? As we know, lots of devotional places, shrines. For example, there's this temple which has been interpreted, and we discussed this before, as the grisly scene of a human sacrifice that was interrupted by an earthquake which brought the temple down on top of the people inside, and therefore froze the whole scene in place for us to find. So the working hypothesis here is that this was the site of some kind of periodic feasting or ritual behavior. Now remember, you can take a drink every time you hear an archaeologist use the word ritual to explain something that they don't understand. Anyway, we'll wait to see what more comes out, because this is very much a developing story and ongoing project. But as for that airport, which is set to open up in 2027, it might face a few delays.
Son of a Oh my God!
Now, this specific site was supposed to be used for a radar station, but Lina Mendoni, the Greek Minister of Culture, herself an archaeologist, did confirm that the site would be preserved and, well, they'll find another place for that radar. But this is just the nature of construction in a place like Greece or Italy. In fact, in the course of building this one airport, this is just one of 35 archaeological sites they've uncovered. And think about it, each one of those is a delay. But that is one of the joys of visiting a place like Athens or Rome, where you can see archaeological exhibits right in the metro stations. All right, so moving on to the next story. Ecocide on Rapa Nui? Well, if you remember way back to our episode about Easter Island, there was a theory called ecocide, and that was promoted by Jared Diamond. Essentially what it said was that Rapa Nui was once home to many thousands of people who overexploited the land and through deforestation caused a lot of erosion, and that led to poor harvests. A lot of the people died, there were fights over resources, and that's why when the Europeans arrived, there were only a few thousand people discovered. Now, this idea has been controversial for some time, refuted by other evidence, for example, lack of a sign of warfare and violence on skeletons that were found, lack of signs of mass habitation, but now a new piece of research helps refute it. Now, this study, led by an American team, some of them from my old home state of New York, leveraged a lot of technology, specifically near-infrared and short-wave infrared satellite imagery and machine learning. Now, that's a lot of technology, which, as you probably know, is not my strong suit, so let me break it down for you. When you go to Easter Island, you definitely see some trees and greenery, but it's not exactly a lush place. It's heavily eroded, and it's just not really the kind of tropical paradise you might expect it to be. And as you walk around Easter Island, you see clusters of small rocks. Now, I didn't remark on this at the time, but it is in my pictures. Now, what are these rocks? It is argued that they are the remains of rock gardens. This was an adaptation for the unfavorable soil conditions of Rapa Nui, both the quality and the quantity of the soil. So when the Polynesian people, the Rapa Nui, arrived, they couldn't just import the farming methods from other more lush Polynesian islands, like terrace farming, for example. And hence, because the Rapa Nui people had to make do with this sort of rock gardening, the island never could have sustained a population of 8, 9, or 10,000, just a max of a few thousand that it had since achieved. So goes the argument. So what the team actually did was they visually surveyed the island, the site of some of these rock gardens, and they taught an AI model how to recognize them. Then they fed a bunch of the satellite imagery of the island into the model, and the model spit out some pretty surprising results.
Crazy.
If you look at that map, the yellow areas are the sites that the team visually surveyed. They went there and checked. The red is what the model identified as potential rock garden sites to a reasonable degree of certainty. So what does this all amount to? Actually, it's less than 1 square kilometer of land used for this rock gardening, this agriculture, which is less than 1/5 of even previously conservative estimates. And what are the implications of that? Well, essentially, it means the island never could have sustained a population of more than a couple thousand, which is exactly what the first Europeans to arrive found. That means no ecocide. Actually, it just represents a really good adaptation of the native people to some pretty challenging local environmental and climatic conditions. Now, the study isn't perfect. According to Rapa Nui expert and Professor Sue Hamilton, who is actually the former director of the Institute of Archaeology at UCL where I study, and a lovely person, There are some things that could be done to improve the study or get a higher level of confidence and corroboration. First, not all of the rock garden sites were captured, and they may not have been contemporaneous. So, in other words, if people were moving around or settlement sites were moving, they weren't necessarily all around at the same time. So what this would imply to rectify the situation is some more visual surveys and some test digs at some of these rock garden sites to try to get some dating information. Also, the people at these earlier times very well may have supplemented their diet with stuff other than what came out of these rock gardens, like fish. And that could be figured out through isotopic testing of human skeletal remains. However, this is a great example of a technological approach to an old question, and it did produce some pretty different results than what we've previously seen. But like so often in archaeology, it doesn't prove anything beyond a reasonable doubt, so let the debate continue. Okay, so for our final story, we're returning to the site of that famous Antikythera wreck, where in 1900 they found the ancient Greek Dial of Destiny. Well, as I mentioned in that episode, there's pretty much constant ongoing work at that site and on the objects found there, and the findings of that is what we're going to discuss today. So just in the last month, a team from the Swiss Archaeological School in Greece were investigating two sites just about 200 meters or 700 feet away from the original wreck. They were greatly aided in this by Hublot Explorations, that's related to the fancy Swiss watch brand, as well as the Greek Coast Guard's Undersea Mission Unit, which both help provide undersea drones to help monitor the dive and provide 3D imaging of the site. Of course, a lot of that imaging and mapping was done in the recent years, which is why now archaeologists can rely on some pretty detailed information about the area, and therefore choose sites with a great degree of knowledge, not just sort of trial and error as was done in the past archaeology. Anyway, the divers found loads of stuff. Around 300 artifacts or groups of artifacts. Now, among these were lots of pieces of marble statues, 18 statues to be exact. They, of course, also found loads of pottery, and with all this cargo, that leads us to the most exciting find, a whole other ship. The team found planking that amounted to a significant portion of the hull structure, so much so that the team was able to figure out a bit more about how it was built. And fun fact, opposite to how ships are built in the modern era, which is that you sort of construct the frame and then put the planking over it, this ship's exterior was constructed first, and then it was bolstered with an internal structure to reinforce it. So this raises the question, what is the relationship between this newly discovered ship and the original Antikythera wreck? You see, they both seem to have sank around the same time based on the pottery finds. There is no carbon dating yet or tree ring dating, as that takes some time. Remember, this was just found about a month ago. And given that the pottery dating matches up, an intriguing thought comes to mind. Was there some kind of altercation between these two ships? Remember, alongside the original wreck was a kind of a naval weapon used to sink ships called a dolphin.
Dolphin! Dolphin!
Now, the archaeologists originally said that dolphin had no role in sinking the original wreck. But honestly, as the hull was so fragmentary, I don't really know how they can be so sure of that. However, it could have just been a storm that sank both ships at the same time, or that they both just sank in the same era, but at different specific times. We don't know yet. The good news, as we've seen, this site has been a gold mine for archaeological info over the last 100 years. And as this specific project is set to run through 2025, and they will certainly be more in the following years, we may just know the answer to these questions in the next few years. Okay, so that was my first edition of Archaeology News after coming back, and it was all sequels. Go figure. Hey, If you like what you heard, give me that thumbs up below, hit that bell to subscribe, or if you want to support more independent archaeology content, consider contributing to my Patreon, where you can enjoy some exclusive members-only benefits and other goodies. Until the next dig.